supply of alcohol to minors.
David Clark.
Mr. Chair, I rise to speak in favour of the bill broadly and Part 1 with it. Part 1 contains the objects, as we all know. I do feel overall that the government is wasting a once-in-a-generation opportunity to put through more pervasive legislation that would address the issues at the heart of the problem that our society has. However, overall, I want to signal from the beginning that I will support the legislation because it takes some steps in the right direction. I had the privilege in my previous role as head of a university college to be on the Vice-Chancellor's Alcohol Advisory Task Force at Otago. And that experience confirmed for me a number of things that I already understood about alcohol culture, primarily through access to experts in the field. Primary health experts in New Zealand are pretty much of one mind on this stuff. It's not like the 100% pure matter where Mr. Key can say, oh, you find one expert that says we're no longer 100% pure and I'll find you another one that says we are. Or perhaps that's not a good example, since I don't think that's a fair case either. In this area, in primary health, people are of one mind. The research is really clear that alcohol-related harm can best be curbed through use of mechanisms like pricing, marketing, distribution and supply. There is no wavering on this. It's not that there is debate around what are the best measures for curbing alcohol-related harm. There is really clear evidence, and so I would challenge those members opposite who haven't yet sat down with experts in this area to do so, because they are more than willing to share from their learnings. The primary health experts in this country are very generous with what they have learnt as a result of their studies, and they are keen to see change for the betterment of New Zealand society. This is one area where our universities do take a strong role in being critic and conscience. Mr. Chair, Dunedin North, the electorate that I represent, is an electorate that wrestles with alcohol issues in respect of the student population in particular. I would argue that those alcohol-related issues are no better, nor any worse than previous generations. Much media centres on the general concept that the world is going to hell in a handbasket in that respect. I don't buy into that. I think that different generations have treated alcohol in a similar way. This is an intergenerational issue that we are dealing with here. There is some evidence that fewer people are drinking heavily, but those that are now drinking more heavily. But overall, the picture is very similar to what it was a generation ago. Alcohol-related harm, we now know, though, a little more about it than we did a generation ago, and that is why it is imperative that we act now in a way that wasn't clear to us a generation ago. Who knows if in my day we had acted to curb, or the society's leaders had acted to curb alcohol-related harm when I was a student, whether we wouldn't have solved the problem of world peace by now. Anything is possible. It's certainly the case that generations up till now have had their development impaired in one form or another through the use of alcohol. We now know through the use of MRI scanners that frontal lobe development is taking place between about the ages of 13, that adolescence now stretches from 13 to 23, and that frontal lobe development, which happens toward the end of that period, at its kind of peak between the ages of 18 and 21, when students are undertaking studies, undergraduate studies in particular at university, that is when they are developing their critical faculties, the powers of rational thought, laying out an argument. Those processes are being hardwired into the frontal lobe at that point in their development. But that frontal lobe, we also know, is responsible for addictions. It is the centre in the human body for addictions. So at the same time as those students are studying by day to improve their rational thought processes, many of them are out drinking and creating a lifetime of addiction for themselves. Now, this was not knowledge that was as immediately clear to us a generation ago, but it is now much more evident through advances in science. So it's imperative upon us, as those who have inherited this science, that we, Mr. Chair,
Dr. David Clark,
that we speak out about it and make the case for change. We also know that education doesn't make a great impact in respect of addictions and in respect of, certainly, of student behaviour. Students drink because it is a risky practice. That is why they drink heavily. They choose to drink heavily because it is a risky practice. Telling students that drinking is a risky practice simply reinforces the reasons that they're wanting to do it. In fact, it increases the incentive and encourages the behaviour. And there are studies across the states which demonstrate the way in which education programs have led to absolutely no change in trends of behaviour in respect of teenage risk-taking. I am disappointed personally at the way in which the government has succeeded in framing the alcohol issue as an age issue overall. Personally, that is one of the greatest disappointments to me in respect of this legislation. And opposition parties, I guess, must question themselves, particularly those who feel in conscience educated about this issue and wanting to speak out on it, how they have not done better at countering that particular framing. Because when people think this is an age issue, they forget to ask the wider questions about how we make that societal change and lump the burden of responsibility back on that younger age group, or at least the interest in the debate back on that younger age group and who's in and who's out of the drinking. And we know, as I've said earlier, that pricing, marketing, distribution, supply and age are well above age in terms of influence in terms of people's drinking patterns. I will put forward 2 SOPs later in the debate in respect of price and marketing that are in my name. I do compliment the government for some of the changes they are making in respect of distribution. I know that local councils are grateful that some changes are being made in that area, and it's certainly the case that in Dunedin there are examples of local liquor suppliers appealing for setting up business in the middle of town and the council having no redress. Although the public were against those outlets setting up, wholesale outlets where there are already plenty around, the council was without powers to change it. That will change, as I understand it, if the government's legislation succeeds. So I want to compliment the government on that change. Some of the changes that are being made are positive. However, overall I feel like this is a real missed opportunity, and I'm also disappointed that National are choosing not to exercise their consciences on this issue. I think the conscience, like all human faculties, is a use it or lose it thing, and it's no different in this respect. I think the government should choose to exercise their conscience on this issue. So, Mr. Speaker, overall, Mr. Chair, there is an amount of tinkering here. The changes that could be made are not going to be made, but some others that are worthy of our support will mean that I personally will offer my support to the overall legislation, albeit with some disappointment that some of the bigger levers are being put to one side in favour of what I see as expediency.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'll start where my